Hello, everybody. Uh, this is the podcast for our journal, Turning Toward Being, the Journal of Ontological Inquiry and Education. And today we're going to be having a conversation with Ronald Barnett. And Ronald Barnett is an emeritus professor of higher education at the Institute of Education, University College London. And for the past several decades has been a, uh, a profound voice for the theory of higher education. And his most recent books that we'll be looking into or discussing include the Ecological University, A Feasible Utopia from 2018. Um, and also the companion book to that, which is Realizing the Ecological University, Eight Ecosystems, Their Antagonisms, and a Manifesto from 2024. Um, so, uh, uh, but first, just quick introductions. On our end, my name is Drew Kopp. I'm a professor of writing arts at Rowan University, and
Carolyn White. I'm a professor of the Educational Foundations at Rutgers University, Newark.
Margarida Garcia. I'm a professor of law and social sciences at the University of Ottawa in Canada and the co-director of the Leadership Academy at the University of Ottawa.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And one of the things that we were also pleased to say that Ron is a member of our editorial board for the journal, in part due to his continuous advocacy for the ontological turn in higher education, and so that will be basically the touchstone that we'll be working from throughout our conversation, and so Carolyn, would you like to start us out?
First of all, I'd like to say, Ron, that it took me a while to finish the book because there were so many references that I wanted to explore. And so I'm reading your text, and then I'm going to the footnotes and to the bibliography, and I'm saying, oh, wow, I've got to find time to read this and this and this and that, right? So it was, and I even ended up with, I'll tell you about this later in the call, with a new research project after reading your book. So I don't know if it's going to be mine or somebody else's, but I could see the whole possibility given the way you lay out those 8 ecosystems. So my question to start us off is, how in your intellectual career, how did you find yourself turning toward being, or the what we refer to as ontological inquiry, and also what had you turn toward what you call, I think you write about it as taking good, considering the good of the whole earth, and or not just considering it, but being actively engaged in the what's good for the whole earth. And so could you tell us a little bit about what had you turn to those 2 areas of inquiry?
Well, thank you so much. That gives me a chance to say something I was going to say in introducing myself to you all. You've obviously know a little bit about myself, but another aspect of my autobiography is that I've had 2 careers. For the first half of my adult life, I was an administrator, literally a bureaucrat in albeit in the academic world. And I only, as it were, became an academic in my mid-40s, and then things shot off from there. But I say that because I've always been interested in practices and how we might move organizations forward. And so in my intellectual and academic work, I've never just been interested in, quote, theory or philosophy for its own sake, but I've always always been interested in thinking about the practical implications of concepts and theories for life, for ordinary life, for academic life, and so on and so forth. I also have a sense that, if I can say so, that universities are, dare I say, am I allowed to say this these days, are still important institutions. They are incredible institutions. They're always falling short of their possibilities, and perhaps they're falling even more short these days. But that's by the way. They are complex organizations with massive resources of all kinds, many of which are unrealized. So I'm interested in understanding, and here I put into the conversation two concepts which I run throughout that book. I'm interested in the responsibilities of universities, and I'm interested in their possibilities, and both of those have to go together. We can't really seriously understand responsibilities unless we have a sense of possibilities. And there's no point in worrying about possibilities unless we're also interested in responsibilities. In other words, what ought institutions to do as well as what they can do. Why have I been interested in all of this? Well, because, as I say, I've been in administration, and as an academic, I'm like so many of us, we duck and dive wearing so many different hats these days, and we're all really managers of one kind or another, and we're all obliged to try and think about what's going to happen tomorrow and how we get through the day and all that kind of thing. And I've been privileged to be institutional manager and leader in various fairly senior roles where one's obliged to think about how one's going to take things forward. And I've had a chance to lead one or two academic societies and so on and so forth, where again, one's having to think about how you orchestrate matters to go forward in a better way. So all my life, in a way, I've juggled, thought about higher education and thinking about and actually doing something towards helping institutions and practices to develop. This is rooted quite deeply within me, I would say. And then the pompous word for all of this is ontology. What are institutions? What are universities in the world? How are they connected with the world? And then you go on from there. And I've developed a philosophical theory around ecosystems, and I'm seeing the world through the formation and presence of ecosystems, and I can talk about those if that will be helpful. Because to me, again, going back to possibilities and responsibilities, they only make sense if you have a sense of the structures within which you're working. There's a lot of talk about agency, but agency doesn't make any sense. Serious talk about agency doesn't make any sense unless we have a sense of the structures within which we're working. And part of the challenge, and you have it in spades now in university systems across the world, part of the challenge on universities is not only the degree to which they have possibilities, the degree to which they have agency, but also whether or not that agency can extend to modifying in any way the structures within which they're working. And this is a serious problem for universities right across the world. We don't have to just look at the examples that are right in our face from a certain country of the world, in North America, but you see it actually in systems right across the world. Universities are coming in for a hard time. There's a shift towards populism, to more authoritarian kinds of governments, and even in the global south, where countries look to their universities to help them move forward, they're nevertheless on the receiving end a very tiresome and oppressive state orchestrated policies towards their universities. So there are issues here about that relationship between structure and agency, which play out in a very severe way right across the world, and it's something that I'm concerned about. So, sorry if I'm rambling a bit, but these things are passions to me, actually, because I've worn all the T-shirts, I've got all the scars on me to show it, where one's come up against state agencies in various ways, and it's a tough life. So I see philosophy in dealing with concretely with matters on the ground. And I think I repeated it in my book, probably in the introduction, a sentence I had in one of my previous books. My partner tells me my head is in the clouds. Well, my head might be in the clouds, but I like to say my feet are also on the ground. So you've got that phrase, head in the clouds, but feet on the ground. And this is an awkward situation to be in, as I say with a smile on my face in the book. But nevertheless, I think that's where any serious philosopher has to be.
Actually, just to kind of underline something that's in what you just said, but it's also, you mention it several times in the book, but I don't know if you fully go into it, which is the distinction between management and leadership. There's several points where you sort of bring that up, and then there is a difference between these. And then I think at the very end, you kind of delve into it. But I think that this is a crucial distinction that's also captured in that wonderful statement, head in the clouds and feet on the ground. So I'm just curious if you could help distinguish management and leadership the way that you do.
Well, thank you so much for that question, Drew, because it's a question after my own heart. As I say, I've ducked and dived and worn all the T-shirts, and I can't do everything in a single book, but it is a topic on which I've touched several times in my writings, because it's a distinction I'm very keen to make. And what I say is both concepts are vitally important. We need good managers to run our very complex institutions we call universities, but we also need good leaders. Sometimes one can be fortunate to find both in the same person, but very often not. And that's not a problem, because good leaders will assemble teams around them with different capabilities. And they will have managers also with different capabilities. But what I also say is, as Churchill said of his generals, that leadership managers should be on tap, but not on top. I'll just say that again, managers should be on tap, but not on top. And for me, the concept of leadership comes before management. We cannot make sense of management unless we have a sense of where we're going. And that is principally a task of leadership. Now, that is not to say that leaders have to dream everything up by themselves. On the contrary, I had the privilege of drawing up the first corporate strategy of my university, but I did it in a very collegiate way. Would you believe we had lunchtime meetings, open lunchtime meetings, and we got the people on the reception desk sitting down with senior professors talking about the future of the university. Can you imagine that? How often does that happen? But that's the way I worked. Leaders don't have to produce every idea about the future of their universities. It's their job to orchestrate a debate so that a university can go forward in a collective spirit and have a sense of its future. And that is a rather tricky matter to do, if I can say so. Leadership is jolly difficult. By the way, so is management. I've also touched on this in relation to my philosophical work. In my philosophical work, for example, forgive me if I'm going off piste, but a distinction that I make in my philosophical work is that between complexity and a term I coined, super complexity. Now, both again are very important. Complexity for me refers to the craziness of the world we're in this sense, refers to the craziness of systems running into each other and overloading other systems, including systems we call human beings. why do human beings get stressed? They get stressed partly because they're faced with an overrun of systems running across them and into them. So I'll give the example of a doctor having too many patients to see, not enough resources, not enough time, too many standards of oppressive state agencies, and changing drugs systems and changing pharmaceutical practices and one thing another. What is it like to be a doctor under those circumstances? It's jolly difficult because you're managing complexity. It's an overrun of systems complexity. But alongside that, I posit what I call supercomplexity. What is supercomplexity? Supercomplexity is complexity in spades in this particular sense, that supercomplexity refers to a welter, an outpouring, an explosion, a multiplication of ideas and concepts. Now, and that sounds rather philosophical and theoretical, but it's actually what it is to be a human being in the world today. Why do doctors commit suicide? They commit suicide partly because of the overrun of systems that I'm talking about, but they also commit suicide because nobody knows what it is to be a doctor these days. Okay, the very concept of doctor is up for grabs. So these poor doctors are not only managing systems, but they're managing who they are, and they don't know how to manage who they are. What is it to be a doctor in a complex, so-called democratic society where there are all sorts of ideas and expectations on doctors, and if they're having to please all sorts of people with all sorts of definitions and all sorts of expectations, because all sorts of concepts of doctor swirling around. What is it to be a professor? Nobody knows, and so on and so forth. So the basic concepts for which we understand ourselves are mobile, they're in motion, and we can't grab hold of them. And partly this was fundamental plank of postmodernism, but there is no stability to our fundamental concepts: knowledge, truth, democracy, da-da. But as I say, multiplying that up and thinking about human identity, it becomes a very serious matter, because we ourselves are now unstable in a dramatic and severe sense that we no longer know who we are. We cannot know who we are under these circumstances of multiplying and conflicting conceptual frameworks and ideas in the world. And this is partly what it means to be a human being in the world. Now, going back to management and leadership, what's that? Why am I running the two together? Because, to put it crudely, the task and the art of management is precisely the task and art of managing complex systems. And that is very, very difficult. So let not the academics rubbish managers, because being a manager under these circumstances is very difficult. You're creating, you're managing all sorts of different systems all at once, and they're moving around. Okay, but then what's leadership? Then what's left for leadership? Well, leadership is precisely the even more difficult task of managing supercomplexity. What is it to be a university? Nobody knows. But leaders have to lead universities, even when nobody knows what a university is anymore. Try writing a corporate strategy for a university in the mid-21st century. It's rather difficult. Why is it so difficult? Because we don't know what a university is anymore. This is a fundamental problem of our age. We get up in the morning not knowing who we are, and university leaders get up in the morning not knowing what a university is anymore. But their job is still to lead the troops, lead the university, lead their institution, even though there are multiple and antagonistic ideas scudding around as to what a university is in the world. So there you have a nice way of understanding, conceptualizing, philosophizing the relationship between leadership and management.
So I have a ton of questions, but I'll go to my last one, which is, one of the areas that for Caroline, Margarita and I that we're sort of passionate about is how do we arrange, manage, lead educational conversations such that the result is those undergoing that education be they find themselves being leaders in their lives or whatever complex systems they're having to deal with. Um, so I'm curious, there are moments of you addressing that kind of like what would that look like, that kind of education? Um, you talk about transdisciplinarity and trans experientiality as like sort of like a necessary constituent. You also talk about the ability to hold opposing points of view and deal with being the kind of being that one has to become when confronting super complexity, right? That there's
Exactly.
something I have to undergo.
Exactly.
I can't
Exactly.
be the me that I
Exactly.
found myself being at the beginning.
Exactly. 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 Well, you've put it all so well, Drew. Somehow or other, as human beings, we have to come now to live with instability, not only instability in the world outside of ourselves, but instability inside ourselves. And this is a very peculiar situation to be in, where we know that no system, no ideology, no concept, and no form of identity can, or should be stable. Um, of course, we see all sorts of efforts now in the world going on in the reverse direction. We see authoritarians of various hues trying to close things down and try and pretend that they know how things should be, and trying to limit matters in all sorts of ways. And pretending that there is stability and they know how matters should be and are to be. And you see a total inability to live with this kind of instability that I'm talking about. I mean, what terrifies me partly is not only what some of these people say, but their very posture, the very way they engage in so-called conversation. They're very rude to each other. They're very rude. They don't let people speak. They know how the world is, and they know how the world is to be, and they try and corral everybody into their way of thinking and doing and acting and being. Uh, Whereas for anybody with any quotes intelligence, the world manifestly is not like that. The world is in motion. And the term motion, I haven't done enough work on it yet, but it's a very important term for me. And I do feel that the world is unstable, and that instability is something we have to live with. We have to live with it on a personal level. We have to live with it on an institutional level. So, what does this mean for our pedagogies? What does it mean for our managers? Well, at the pedagogical level, it means helping students to live with this instability. So I don't do any face-to-face teaching anymore. I'm still supervising students. But when I used to teach not so long ago classes of students, I, I, I enjoyed starting a whole class with a question, and a question that had no answer, or a question that had all sorts of answers to it. And then I would perhaps even surprise students, spend the first 20 or 30 minutes of time often will fly, just helping them to see that there were different ways into the apparently very simple question that I had raised. So, for example, I used to teach programs to postgraduate students on higher education. And I would delight in starting a session by asking the question, does the pro-provost for research and the pro-provost for teaching ever need to talk to each other? In other words, are the teaching and research functions of a university, are do they relate to each other, or are they separate? And it seems a very simple question. You've got in the senior management team, you've got somebody who's responsible for research, you've got somebody who's responsible for teaching. Neither they ever talk to each other. So I just started a teaching session just like that. Instead of standing up and speaking for half an hour or 45 minutes with a nice fancy PowerPoint, I did have that up my sleeve. But I would start off with a question. So what I was trying to do all the time is to unsettle the students. And then we'd have a debate. And hands would go up and people would start talking to each other and start talking to the class. And you'd elicit different views and conversations would start. And all the time I'm trying to unsettle students. And of course, this is unsettling for some students because they want ready answers. And they're on the internet and they get their answers off the internet and social media and they have their gurus and their influencers and they know what to think and speak. Whereas job of the pedagogue of the teacher for me is to unsettle students. So unsettlement is a concept that I like to play with. But going back to management and leadership, the good leader understands that. And if I can be anecdotal, there's a remarkable provost who's leading my own university. I've corresponded with him. He doesn't really know me. Why should he? Well, he does actually. But he's leading a massive institution, University College London. It's got a turnover of well over $2 billion, $3 billion a year. Small beer, I know, by some American university standards, but still huge in global terms. It's a top 15 university in the world. And he's very alert to all of this. And he's very conscious that in his university, staff will think all sorts of different things. And this is a world of culture wars on campus, where people disagree and often disagree violently and shout down visiting speakers. Mm-hmm. Well, up with that I will not put in my work. But he I don't know whether he's coined it or whether he's got it off the internet or some paper he's read, but he talks about disagreeing well. And he's been orchestrating all sorts of events at various levels across the university to help people come together who do have very radically different views, but to be able to disagree well. And this, it seems to me, is part of what leadership is all about. In one of my leadership roles, I was responsible for all the admissions tutors across my university. And I would delight in getting them together and exposing them to some rather tricky issues about how we were to go forward, how we were to develop our postgraduate system. All sorts of complex issues arise there. But I would try to get them to have a debate about these issues to see that things are more complicated than they realise. All the time I'm trying to unsettle people because that seems to me the world we're in. And you'll see the title of my book, 8 Ecosystems, Their Antagonisms, and a Manifesto. So even though we live in a tricky world, a crazy world, I use very technical terms, you understand, I try and find ways forward, practical ways forward.
Mm-hmm.
So, Professor Barnett, I have a question about that feasible utopia for a university that could be turned ontologically. And my question for you about that is, what needs to be educated if we are to do that? In terms of, so what are we educating or stimulating in students that is different than what we've been doing? And what would be the pedagogy of that ontological education? The techniques, the exercises, the practices?
I'm going to answer that, but will you just forgive me for 10 seconds? I need to. I'm going to lose my battery if I'm not careful. So
Oh
I've
yeah,
got to
yeah, go
sort this out.
ahead.
I'm sorry.
No worries. This would be one of those moments I can cut out. Uh,
You can practice your editing skills.
yeah, it's management.
There we go.
For sure.
Yeah, that's definitely management. Right. Well, hopefully we're in business. I think that's fine. Sorry about that. Well, what's different? Well, I think, as I say, in the best of old style universities, the kind of pedagogy I'm looking for was to be seen to a fair degree, not entirely, because I think it needs to be taken further. What the old universities were good at were helping students to live in their minds with instability. What I think we now need to do is help students live together, live in the world, in its practices, in its institutions. They're going to go out into the world, they're going to find their way in the world, and we've got to help give them the wherewithal to be able to live with instability and difficulty and challenge in the institutions they're going into. So, for example, I that in one of those books, probably in both of them, I use the example of the whistleblower. Imagine, well, I don't know why I'm always seem to be drawn to medical metaphors, but imagine a doctor or a senior nurse in a hospital, and they're very experienced, and they see a practice that's going wrong, it's falling well short of standards that could even be injurious to human life, and they feel the need with their own professional standards to do something about it. But they can see that the practices they're concerned about have become rather entrenched, and there are interests involved, and to say anything about it will be to rock the boat in all sorts of ways. Well, are we giving our students the human capacity to engage in difficult and challenging areas like that? It's not just a matter of thinking with instability, but it's also a matter of practicing and being engaged and with instability and trying to move things on in a human way, in an institutional way. And that's why, for example, I'm all the time trying to understand things in a broader context. You couldn't be a whistleblower of the kind I'm talking about unless you had a sense, for example, of world standards in nursing and health and medicine. But it also means having a sense of the managerial structures and institutions in and around medicine, for example, but understanding, having the political nous of working out strategies for moving forward. So, and I don't think we've done anything much like that. I mean, American universities have been very good at sending students out into the local community to engage in what they call service learning. But the sense that we need to actually be helping students to be formed as critical citizens within their university program of study, to use a phrase, critical citizen, I think isn't one that's readily understood. I'm writing separately, by the way. I wrote 20 years ago, over 20 years ago, a book on critical thinking, and I'm going back to that now and writing a new book on critical thinking. Can you hear me all right?
Yep,
Yes?
yep.
Can you hear me? Yes. I'm writing a new book on critical thinking. Why? Because I think there is a stronger need now for critical thinking than ever before. And part of the problem there is that the very debate on critical thinking is very narrow. The literature on critical thinking is very narrow. I won't go into that in great depth now, but I think except for some marginal domains and little sects in higher education. By and large, more radical sects. We've not actually practiced higher education in this way. We've seen it as, and Descartes has got a lot to answer for. We see it as rather cerebral activity, the mind cut off from the body. What I've been trying to do is help, at least in my writings, and I didn't do enough of it in my teaching, I'm realizing that now, is to help students develop, as quotes, the old liberal idea of the whole person. In a way that it's nothing too radical about what I'm trying to do, except I think it is radical because we're all going in the opposite direction.
But Professor Barnett, should it be critical being, as in what you just said? What does it take to educate the whole person? That it's not just thinking. Maybe thinking is a trap word for the times we're living. So what is that thing you talk about being a critical ontologist or a critical being? And what would you have done more in your teaching if you were to do it again? You just said, I wish I had done more of that. What is that?
Yeah. Well, thank you. A critical being was a phrase actually I coined myself in that book on critical thinking, and I introduced a whole battery of new terms and concepts because I found that the very term critical thinking was inadequate to do what I wanted it to do. So I talked about criticality, I talked about critical being, talked about critical action. Well, I mean, there are inspirational teachers around who are doing what perhaps I was unable to do. Perhaps I don't have the personality to do it, but there are certainly inspirational teachers around who are doing what I'm doing, who, are adept at bringing students together, in getting them engaged in looking at scenarios, getting them together to work imaginatively on new projects, on thinking through new possibilities. And they've got all a gamut of ways of doing this, even going, as it were, back to primary school, ways and methods. It's quite wonderful to hear and read and see how driven and how energetic some of these, dare I say, young people are. Most of them are women, by the way. Men are hopeless at this sort of thing. It's not true, but I exaggerate to make a point. I see, as I say, inspirational young teachers firing up their students, getting them together, engaging them together, being imaginative together, and not just at a local level. There's a book by a woman called Anka Schwittay, Schwittay. Schwittay. She's a professor at the University of Sussex in England, and she works with postgraduates who are in the field of development studies. And she does this. You can feel the energy coming out of her texts. You can see the students almost in your mind's eyes. They come together and they work with bits and pieces of scissors and paper, and they create things in an embryonic way, imaginatively constructing new ideas for, geopolitical developments. So that's also a challenge, getting people to leap from the local to the global. So it can be done. As I say, it may be that I didn't have the personality or the wit or the human capabilities of doing it, but my ideas have moved on quite a lot, I think, over the last 20 years. And I've gone more to the sense that we need to be freeing the whole person in this way. This is quite scary, both for the students and for the teachers. It's a risky situation. As I say, even at my level, in posing an awkward question at the start of a teaching session, and you don't know how students are going to react. And teachers like to retain control of the pedagogical situation, whereas I'm quite happy to let it go and see what happens. But we need more of that.
Mm-hmm.
Your comments have me reflect on many, many years ago, like the 1970s. I was in a undergraduate program and in sociology, and we had a visiting professor from England. His name was Hugh Bynum, and he wrote a book called Working for Ford, and he came from a working class family, and he spent a lot of time, with the factory workers. And so on one of the first days of class with him, he said, this was like the senior seminar. We were all getting ready to graduate, right? And he said, how many of you have read this book and this book and this book and this book? And we hadn't read any of them, right? And so he said, okay, we're going to have some fun this semester, right? And so he was always talking, always linking the theory to his lived experience, right? And then after class, we would go to the bar, and the class would continue till late at night. But he left an impression on me that I was at the time, I was, like being like our students, right? Embedded in a system that you just go from this course to this course to this course. And he interrupted the whole thing, right? Like, and told me books once he learned what I was interested in to read, right? And but it also, what you're saying also has me think about the part of the book where it occurs to me almost like you switch gears, and there's a way you're writing about the sensuous and the imagination and love and then spirit, right? And all of that discussion, as well as the discussion about, once I got, comfortable with the discussion about the ecosystems, I could begin to see the work of our former chancellor here at Rutgers Newark. I met her many years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with Nancy Cantor, but she's now the president of Hunter College in New York City. But the first time I met her, do you know of her work? No.
I don't think I do, I'm afraid.
You what?
He doesn't think.
I don't think I do know of her.
Okay. Well, what I would say is, just to give you a sense of this, is that when she was at the University of Michigan in, I don't know, maybe a provost position, I don't remember exactly. When she was there, an alum came to her and said, if you don't stop this case that you're pushing in the Supreme Court, I'm going to stop giving money to the University of Michigan. And she looked him in the eye and she said, sir, the University of Michigan is not for sale, right? So now she goes from Michigan to Illinois, and she says when she's hired, one of the things I'm going to do is get rid of the racist mascot that the University of Illinois had. And so what happened was citizens in Champaign-Urbana eventually put up billboards telling Nancy Cantor to leave town, right? So it had me, again, go back to your model, of these ecosystems. So she goes from Illinois to Syracuse, and then she comes to Rutgers Newark. And when she came to Rutgers Newark, let me go back for a minute. When she was in Illinois, I went to an event where a friend of mine was being honored with the Chancellor's Medallion for his years of work at the university. And I watched this woman, short, petite, Jewish woman, hugging these Black men, very tall, big Black men that I had worked with at the university. And I was like, and then my friend introduced me to her, and I said, this can't be a chancellor, because in my brain, chancellors didn't hug people, right? They didn't. And she was so authentic when I talked with her. There was no barrier, right? She was present with me. And so when she came to Rutgers Newark, the first thing she did was she had people she did a listening tour. And in mine, I live right 2 blocks from the campus. So in my neighborhood, we sat around a dining room table with my neighbors, many of whom have no connection to the university. They're just citizens of, not just, but they are citizens of the city. And she listened to them talk about their relationship with the university. And and didn't defend, just listened, right? Fantastic. And then at the end, she said, okay, what do we want to create now? And she
Yes.
did that with every part of the city, right?
Yes.
And it was like she had read your book, and she was, seriously. And then what happened was, and just her presence on campus, when you talk a lot about inspiration in your book, and just her presence on the campus.
Yes.
Inspired me. I would walk by the building where her office was, and I knew I had a partner in what I was up to, right?
Yes, fantastic.
And then she got fired by the president of Rutgers. And instead of telling us the truth, the president made it seem like she was just leaving. And then the mayor of the city of Newark came to our convocation and said to the students out loud, well, first the mayor sent all the faculty and staff a letter saying the chancellor is not leaving because she's choosing to, she's leaving because she's been fired. And then when it came to convocation, he said 3 times out loud to the students, I love Nancy Cantor, right? Now, this doesn't happen, right? And so, but what she had done was she had taken action in every ecosystem. People loved her. They trusted her. They believed in her, right? And but then she got hired at Hunter. So what I am seeing is we need case studies of these leaders. That don't quit, that don't give up their commitment. But also they get dismissed for God knows what reason, because people aren't comfortable with what they're creating.
Yes. Well, exactly. And it's a lovely case study of what I'm talking about. I think the development of the capacity to concern yourself with difficulty in the world and take it head on, and reach out and embrace it, is very disturbing for the powers that be, because, as I said, they want an easy life, and they want to control things. And people who go around opening the windows and letting in different perspectives, encouraging different perspectives, of course, are very destabilizing. But it seems to me that that's what we have to do, in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of levels. We have to be a bit of a thorn in the flesh of the big battalions, as I call them. But there is a politics to all of this. There's a geopolitics. There's also a micropolitics, and sometimes in order to get through to where we want to, we have to have political nous ourselves, because we are often ducking and diving with massive power structures. And that has to be understood if we're going to get as far as we might. But these are all very tricky professional judgments to be made.
Yeah. It's when she left Illinois, my mentor from the university there said to me, the University of Illinois will never be the same because of her moral leadership. So, she inspired people to continue to believe that things were possible when we live in this world that's so full of resignation and cynicism, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a world, as I say, in which frameworks are closing in. I use the word frameworks a lot because I'm very keen that we live within frameworks without realizing it. And I'm very keen that the framework should multiply and should be opened. And then we have to live with the consequences, which are not always easy. But if we're going to get by on this crazy little planet, we've got to somehow live with multiple frameworks, multiple sets of values, and so on and so forth. Why have I invested the whole of my life, can you believe, in all of this work and thought? because I believe that universities are incredible places, but could be more so and need to be more so in a world in which thought in a way and frameworks are diminishing, are being squeezed, and are being limited. And that's partly what I've been trying to do in all of my work and my talks around the world. I'm going to be modest to say that it's a great pleasure to me as I look back on nice comments that people have made on my writing and my talking around the world. They say I'm inspirational, and I only mention that because that's what I'm trying to. I think, Caroline, it was you who mentioned my use of the word spirit in my work, and that's very important to me. And it's absolutely the magical part of universities when they're working together, when people come together end of Friday afternoon or whatever it is, you celebrate somebody having a new paper in a journal or a new book out or whatever it is, and you get people together and things fizz and there's an engagement. You feel the spirit is flowing in a very positive way, in an open way, and that's what universities can do. And then you multiply that up. Universities are extraordinary, as it were, microcosms of the world. The big universities have students coming at them from over 100 countries. They are a mini United Nations. And, to what extent are we realizing those possibilities, getting students to understand each other, enjoy each other's cuisines and cultures, and so on and so forth. Universities, as I say, could be doing even more in so many fronts. By the way, that leads me into, if I can just mention an interest of mine, which is just developing. It was actually there, would you believe, I think 50 or 60 years ago, and it's been submerged by the way universities have become and the debate and the literature about universities. For example, take the term critical thinking we were touching on earlier. By and large, critical thinking is understood as a matter of a relationship between a student, a program of study, and a professor. And the question is, how does the professor get the student to develop critical thinking in relation to their course of study? Well, that's a frightfully narrow way of understanding critical thinking. And just to leap on, what I'm interested in is the way in which a university as an institution, a mega institution, can be itself as an institution a place for the formation, development of criticality. And I think we've missed a trick in not understanding that matter. And I don't see a literature on that matter. But if you think about it, the universities typically they might have tens of thousands of students, some thousands of staff, extraordinary resources, and I'm offering this thought experiment. Imagine you were to bring students together from over 100 countries around the world. You bring them together with quite intelligent and clever people. We call them professors or doctors or teachers. And you put them into an institution which has mega resources and libraries and information systems, all sorts of technologies. You have no courses or programs of study, but what an extraordinary institution it will be. And it will be tacitly and implicitly an institution for the development of criticality, because these people are rubbing up against each other and they're having to think and take on board other points of view, and they're having to grow as people. And we're missing a trick here in understanding the potential of universities as institutions and sites of criticality. When the new university, I'm so old, I remember we talked about the new universities, the 1960s universities in England. We had a clutch of new universities created, and we had extraordinary architects who designed some of those universities. And part of the design and the thinking of those universities architecturally was design open spaces where people would just serendipitously bump into each other across the disciplines who would never otherwise see each other. And that's absolutely crucial to me. And it's part of the general sense of a university as a space for the formation of not only just polite interaction, how are you, what's the weather like, but actual serious critical formation of critical persons, of critical beings in the world, where we come up against each other and against other points of view, other frameworks of thought that we otherwise wouldn't have encountered.
Your example has me think about a few years ago when we had a student encampment on our campus for 40 days. And every day my dog and I would go over to the encampment. And what happened in that space was what I want to have happen in my classroom, right? One day sitting on a bench with a student and her parents, right? And her parents are talking about their support for this encampment that's taking a stance, to free Palestine. And then sitting on another bench with a group of students from the from the MFA program, right? And we were talking about what scholars were inspiring us, and each of us had a notepad out writing notes about what somebody else found inspiring. But the students themselves had these gatherings, right, to self-govern the encampment. And while I didn't agree with all the decisions that they might be making, I knew it wasn't my place to correct them. It was my place to be there and witness what they were doing and learn from what they were doing, right? Unless they asked for my opinion. But that for me was a moment of what you're pointing to, right? The possibility of people coming together because they're passionate about something and they want to make something work that's not working.
But in a situation where they're almost obliged to listen to other people. And that, I'm afraid, is what we're increasingly not doing these days in a Trumpian digital age. We're listening to our own voices and the voices of others who just reflect what we want to say and hear. And that's absolutely hopeless. So there are big issues here for me as to what I call the 50% problem. In a world in which 50% are going to university, 50% are not going to university.
Yeah.
So the question in front of universities under those circumstances is, what are the responsibilities and possibilities, to use those two terms again, for the university in relation to those who haven't had the joy and privilege of being in a university? And this is, for me, is a fundamental issue in our age today. Democracy, and I'm very interested in critical theory of the 1930s, and one of their fundamental points was the rupture and the disjunction between concepts and the way the world is. And we see it in spades these days in the term democracy. We can hardly be in a democracy where, frankly, 50% of the population are denied the right to the highest forms of education.
Right. Well, I think so we're at the hour mark, and I think we can possibly stop there to conclude our session, and maybe maybe we can invite you back for a future session to have another conversation, especially once you've gotten this next work on criticality published and available. So let's look ahead to that. When do you think it's likely to be?
I'm writing with a colleague, and it's about 3/4 drafted, but we're going to go on working on it. And it's interesting you mentioned the term criticality, because we're still playing with ideas as to the title. I'm a great believer in titles. I don't know whether you've noticed the titles of my books, but I put huge amounts of effort in thinking of the titles, and then and I go to and fro, and it's a problem and a worry for me. But having fixed on a title, I then try to run the title through the whole books as a theme. So my books go through umpteen drafts and so on and so
Right,
forth.
right.
But at the moment, we're thinking as a possible part of the title, from critical thinking to criticality. So we're thinking that we might pick up this term criticality, which is used quite readily these days. But again, it's a weasel term. In Leclerc's term, it's almost an empty signifier. It's a term without any substance, because again, it's a term that has no generally accepted meaning, I would say.
Well,
but anyway,
I'd like to say,
to round off that.
About that might be, I imagine my inkling is that that's a doorway to what I would call rhetorical education, which is the kind of education I would say that that you're pointing to in the book, but one that has an ontological core to it. And criticality, whatever, in terms of like just wrapping my head around it, is sort of crucial to any interaction with any of the ecologies that you're discussing in the book, because it's that it reveals the antagonisms, like, so that they can be dealt with. And maybe a topic of further discussion at some point would be that maybe the thing what's missing in each of the ecologies that we all have to deal with is the ontological dimension, seems to be the running theme.
Yes.
And
But
criticality opens the door to that.
As I say, we're called things to a temporary halt for today there.
Yeah.
But all I'd add there, Drew, and I think that what you've just said is very helpful to me. I'm going to make a scribble of and steal all your ideas. But it's not just a matter of, as I say, understanding that there are differences, but a matter of feeling that there are differences. And that is a part of the challenge. Anyway, there it is. I think we probably reached a good point where we can bring things to a reasonably orderly close for today. I want to all thank you very much indeed
thank
for
you, Ron,
being so generous towards me and patient with me and listening to me prattle on at various points.
A real pleasure to be with you today.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Barnett.
It's been a delight. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to meet you all.
Okay.
Again, until we meet again.
Until we meet again. Yeah.